So you want to be a pally god in classic World of Warcraft? Well then you've come to the right place. When playing a paladin in classic World of Warcraft, it is important to remember that there are essentially 4 main specs with 4 distinct PvP combat styles and 2 main gearing options, with each spec having significant variation in their strength in executing said combat style, both in general and against certain matchups. Today we'll be exploring the 4 main paladin specs as well as the 4 main paladin combat styles, how each of these specs in question perform in general in executing each combat strategy, ease of play, and raid viability, with the 2 main ways to gear out your paladin come classic to be found in the second part of this video series. So, to begin with, the 4 main classic paladin combat styles are Sustain, Burst, Time on Target, and lastly Jousting, which could also be seen as the use of all 3 of these previously mentioned combat styles as best as they can be done simultaneously. Sustain is a combat style that usually finds a paladin attempting to have a resource war with the opposing player, be that a mana war, an energy war, an HP war, or even a time war, as the paladin plays for time to get certain CDs back up, such as stuns, potions, trinkets, bubbles, and so on. Paladins have, hands down, by far, the highest sustain in classic World of Warcraft of any class or spec if they invest the spells, items, and ultimately their movement into it. And just about any of the 4 specs can outright out-survive many of the other classes in a 1v1 fight, such as rogues, druids, hunters, and warriors, and depending on spec and gear, warlocks, priests, and shamans through a resource war alone. However, although I might talk sometimes about a paladin's ability to sustain for days, never forget that your damage as a paladin is a key and critical component to your resource war endeavors as a paladin, as the mana and time your opponent spends on healing themselves simply means more sustain for you in the long term, and is often necessary to actually win some fights. Aside from the basics, such as mana total, MP5, and knowing your opposing class's interrupts, times, and ranges, all of which will be covered in the class-specific matchup section of this video series, by far the most glaring thing about Paladin Sustain is that a Paladin cannot both heal and move simultaneously. This combined with the simple fact that a Paladin has no innate move speed increases or ways to slow down their opponent outside of special items and engineering such as grenades or the discombobulate array, ultimately is the reason why Paladin combat comes in 4 distinct styles, as if you want to close the distance, run away, or hit your target, you simply cannot do any of these things and heal at the same time. This generally results in a very stop-start or very all-in combat style for most paladins, with not much in the way in between, and thus you ultimately need to know when to forego the damage for healing and when to forego the healing for damage. Second is the simple fact that just running away in a straight line and getting distance between you and your enemy, rather than stopping to heal, can be by far the best play, as there are a number of classes that a paladin might struggle to 1v1 against, but who will likewise struggle to kill the paladin if you are running away in a straight line. These classes include shaman, warlock, and priest in particular, and to a lesser extent mage when you start to get good at it. Examples of this include running away from a shaman while spamming cleanse to instantly remove any slows. Then when you get max range away from the shaman, you can start to heal with a single flash of light, which the shaman will most definitely struggle to close the range to shock interrupt you before you can get such a heal off. This situation becomes even more apparent if the shaman frost shocks you to try to slow you down, which is often seen by most good paladins as their cue to start charging up 5 seconds worth of free healing, because the shaman doesn't want you simply running away so easily. Warlocks and priests are ultimately in the same situation as shamans when chasing a fleeing paladin, except much, much worse, as they have virtually no instant cast damaging spells. And by far the best time to heal under such conditions is right after the warlock or priest puts a dot on you to keep you in combat, as this triggers their 1.5 second global cooldown, allowing you to instantly get off that free big 2.5 second heal before they can get off their 2.5 second fear or mana burn respectively. As such, running and healing in this manner can be a big part of victory for all Paladin specs in the open world and under battleground conditions, especially when considering that your movement likely has you closing with a piece of terrain that can only make things much worse for your enemies. When Paladins talk about the depth of their class being partially in the movement of their class, this is generally what they are referring to. Lastly, it is good to know that there are no melee classes or specs in the game that can 1v1 a Paladin in a toe-to-toe confrontation, when the Paladin is putting a heavy emphasis on sustain. For this reason, sustaining yourself until you can redeploy to some LOS is often huge, and should always be done if and when you are feeling a bit iffy about the matchup you are currently facing. Up next we have the infamous Pally Burst style of play, which all Paladin specs can execute rather effectively in their own way but to different extents. Be it the tried and true stun into Wreck Bomb Death Ray Sapper Charge combo, or the stun, hit, judge, hit, nade, repent, Death Ray, hit, doom combo Deep Ret is capable of pulling off, or Deep Holy's exact same burst rotation just with a critical Holy Shock and a Sapper Charge thrown in there in place of the Repent or Reckoning. The moral of the story is that all Paladins can burst if you are wearing damage gear and have the trinkets to support it. The major difference, however, is just how hard each burst hits and just how easy or hard that burst is to pull off. As a general rule, most classes in the game will have 4.5k hit points if well geared and PvE focused, and 5k hit points if well geared and PvP focused, with all classes also having the ability to instantly heal when not hard CC'd for 3k hit points on demand via the Potion and Whipper Root combo. Most other specs of any class in good gear going full burst can often barely squeak over the 4k mark in burst capability, resulting in most bursts such as the infamous Elemental Shaman Chain Lightning crit into Earthshock crit combo, or the Destrolox Charm into Soulfire crit combo, being often easily negatable by the simple act of tapping Healing Pot and Whipper Root instantaneously upon watching 80 to 90% of your health instantly disappear. Paladin Burst, however, is a completely different beast, as on average it does 4k damage in a single hit, with that number well and truly exceeding the HP total of most targets if allowed any additional time to massage the target's hit points into oblivion, which all Paladins ultimately have in the form of their 6-second stun, with the end result being that this makes playing any Paladin as a walking one-shot Swifty macro truly viable in Classic. It is also possible for some of the Paladin specs, if they push their burst capabilities to the logical maximum, to do well over their target's HP total in damage in a single hit, and generally results in your target either living with the tiniest of health, and thus healing with pots and roots instantaneously back to near full health, or simply exploding outright, much to our amusement. It's fun and effective to be sure, but it's also a bit of a noob killer for most of Vanilla's timeline, so always have a mental backup plan if your target somehow magically survives your initial burst, and try not to put all of your eggs in one basket. The downside to this playstyle, however, is that burst is ultimately high risk, high reward from a purely cooldowns used standpoint, as you are often holding back or outright expending defensive options such as bubble, stun, and potions in an attempt to use them for offensive purposes, meaning quite bluntly that if your burst fails for whatever reason, running away as best as you can with your tail between your legs will often be by far the best option to be sure, and there are always a few classes and specs that simply cannot be bursted outright, such as SL Warlock or a Hunter, Druid, or Mage with half of a brain. As for the upside, you can easily 1v2 and win, get ganked by 5+ people and kill 2 of them before you die fairly regularly, and will never ever fail to have a smile on your face popping enemy players out in the open world, easily dominating entire areas of the map to farm as you please. Burst is ultimately awesome, but it's best to know what to do when that burst either fails or is simply not an option, and to already have the gear equipped for just such an eventuality. Time on target is one of the most interesting and rarely seen Paladin playstyles in classic World of Warcraft, as it requires a certain amount of gear specialization to make work, as well as a deep knowledge of what hard and soft CCs are available to your opposing class, and their cooldowns as they match up with yours, at any given point in time. However, for those who play with and eventually master this playstyle, time on target is truly deadly and an absolute blast to play. As the name suggests, this combat style revolves around a paladin using a variety of move speed buffs, trinkets, offhand heals, pets, and all manner of such gadget nonsense to get on top of their enemy and just sit there, beating on them for as long as possible, essentially grinding your enemies into pulp as they look on in horror as your life bar and mana pool seem to refuse to go down, despite taking and dealing massive damage. Now, there are three major issues with this combat style, and incidentally, they are the three major issues of the Paladin class itself. The first is the fact that you cannot heal and move at the same time. The other is how to get on top of your opponent to begin with, whilst maintaining any semblance of a hit point bar. And the last one is how to properly stick to your targets for the 20 to 30 seconds necessary to kill them, all the while likely suffering hit point damage yourself, without having to stop attacking to heal. For example, if you just said to yourself that you were going to try this tactic and had no extra items whatsoever to support you, you would find that you either can't catch your enemy and are taking damage trying to do so, and thus you have to stop and heal, negating any progress you might have made in closing with your target, or you can catch your target, but you are at 50% life when you do so, and thus can only maintain time on target for about 10 seconds or less before you need to ultimately stop and heal, bubble, or worse. Or you run up to your enemy paying 50% of your HP total to do so, only to get hard CC'd, kited, and finding yourself needing to heal yet again, resetting everything. And thus you can see why this is by far the rarest of the Paladin combat styles, as paladins without gear or knowledge simply cannot make this style, which is one of the deadliest by far, work. For full disclosure, I will put up all of the items that I know of that can help you in this endeavor and let you see what combination of gear you prefer most. But just so as to not dissuade you from this fighting style, I will give you a demonstration of how I have personally found to make this thing work. First, play a sustained paladin spec, such as Holy or Holy Reckoning. Then make it very clear to your opponent that you intend to enter a resource war by attempting to heal your way to victory. This will bait out any and all forms of hard CC such as nades, stuns, death coils, and so forth in an attempt to kill you. CC that once you get on top of your enemy may allow them to get you back off of them, which is ultimately very bad. After you survive all the CC nonsense, heal to full, and then move to close with your target using Discombobulate Array, your only 1 minute long cooldown range slow that is reliable. Once on top of your opponent, and likely at half-life, activate things like Judging Seal of Light on them, popping ZG Trinket and Medicine Pouch, and using some form of life-stealing weapon with a life-stealing enchant such as Skullforged Reaver. Spam Cleanse, and pop any other trinket you may need to stick on them like glue for as long as you can. As you can see here, the heal pullback under these conditions is absolutely frightening. With the gear shown here used in this way, I am healing 36% of my life in 10 seconds from offhand, 1% of my life a second from weapon heal, and close to another 1% of my life a second from life-stealing enchant and the ×2 proc rate off of Judgment of Light, all the while maintaining about 300 DPS on target. Now, it is also good to know that in Classic WoW, very few classes have pushback immunity when attempting to cast spells. And if the target is melee, I would point out that all classes lose badly when standing toe-to-toe with a paladin of any spec in melee. And thus, as you can see in this case example, I have effectively used spec, knowledge, trinkets, and gadgets to effectively overcome the challenges of executing this combat style. I use spec to overcome the hard CC issues of sticking on your target once getting on top of your target. I use gadgets to close the distance, and I use all manner of heal on the move to sustain my hit points, whilst dealing damage to the target. Other strategies I have seen used to great effect involve the use of movement speed enhancers such as speed boots, speed pots, or speed trinket, or opening with one-handed Edward the Odd, looking for that free instant heal proc upon closing with your enemy, only to then swap into a big two-hander or a more time-on-target one-hander DPS weapon. Ret Reckoning in particular relies on a combat strategy of moving faster than normal to get on top of your opponent, putting a huge initial burst into them, and then using pots, bubble, and stun in order to sustain a time-on-target strategy for as long as possible in order to get the kill, as Ret Reckoning has no real in-combat healing potential and therefore must go all in on early kills. In 3-piece rank gear, this strategy often becomes even scarier, as having 29 seconds between two 6-second stuns in order to heal or finish off your enemy, sandwiched in between a 12-second offensive bubble, can be truly deadly. The term jousting from paladins denotes a combat style where the paladin closes with their target, hits it, and then immediately goes into either a heal, kiting, or some form of sustain play only to repeat the process again after healing. This is, in essence, the base PvP combat style for all paladins, unless you as the player decide to do something about it in concerns with either your spec, gear, or the use of gadgets. There are 4 viable and often seen paladin specs that vary slightly from player to player to suit their personal tastes. These specs are Holy, Holy Reckoning, Ret Reckoning, and Deep Retribution. Deep Holy is a very raid viable spec that when switched into damage gear can perform quite well in time on target and burst rolls, but is by far at its strongest in pure sustain fights. It is very important, however, to never neglect doing damage in this spec over sustain, as the damage in many cases is a key and critical aspect of winning sustain wars, especially against certain other classes. I personally find that playing the burst spec in conjunction with the god mode levels of sustain to be by far the best way to play Deep Holy Paladin, as just having the threat of being able to burst out 60% of my target's hit point in damage at any given point in time that I decide to can often be more than enough to win fights against the vast majority of the player base, who often do not respect Deep Holy's burst potential. For overall rankings, I would give the Deep Holy spec a 5 out of 5 for sustain, a 3 out of 5 for burst, a 3.5 out of 5 for time on target, a 2 out of 5 for jousting, and a 5 out of 5 for raid viability. Difficulty level, easy to learn and easy to master. Next we have Holy Reckoning, considered by most Paladin players to be the king of the Paladin specs, and often affectionately referred to as the Swiss Army knife of doom. Holy Reckoning is a highly raid viable spec that is second only to Deep Holy in sustain, second only to Ret Reckoning in burst, equal to Deep Ret in jousting, and is the undisputed king of time on target. This spec's claim to fame is in the combination of its sustain and burst damage capabilities with spell power Reckoning, which for those of you who do not know what Reckoning is a talent that allows the Paladin an extra melee attack every time they are critically hit, and can store up to 4 charges of these free instant auto attacks, for a total of 5 instant melee hits upon their next melee swing, known to the community as the infamous Wreck Bomb. Pair this with the insanity yet to be seen in part 2 of this video series, and people start well and truly getting deleted from the game. For overall scores, I would give Holy Reckoning a 4.5 out of 5 for sustain, a 4.5 out of 5 for burst, a 5 out of 5 for time on target, a 5 out of 5 for jousting, and a 4.5 out of 5 for raid viability. Difficulty level, easy to learn, moderately hard to master, very deep in options. Ret Reckoning is by far and away the best mage killer of the 4 Paladin specs, though it is to be said that Ret Reckoning has by far the lowest sustain of any of the Paladin specs, with the effective hit points of 3 health bars at best, compared to the 9+ of Deep Holy and Holy Reckoning, or the 4 health bars of Deep Ret when played properly. As such, Ret Reckoning plays almost identically to that of a warrior, which is to say that your general combat plan is to simply run at the enemy and hit them so hard that they either die outright or die shortly after you do, with you doing everything in your power to maintain time on target after the initial hit to ensure that they in fact do die. As such, there is extreme nuance in the gearing of this spec, but not so much in its execution, as you are essentially running at your target trying to hit them so hard that they simply cease to exist. And man oh man, can Ret Reckoning do just that and do it consistently. Mathematically speaking, Ret Reckoning can hit just as hard at a single point in time as Holy Reckoning, effectively having identical burst potential of around 4 to 5k. However, it is eye for an eye and the fact that this spec is often using physical damage that makes it the bane of all cloth and leather armor wearers. As against such classes, Ret Reckoning can easily hit for well and truly over 5k, to the point of just outright deleting anything not in mail or plate gear, no Swifty one-shot required. A true one-tap and done, GTFO melee swing that blink and you'll miss it utterly deletes your enemies. However, this spec is sadly almost utterly non-raid viable. So if you hate raiding, love PvP in all forms, are all about the burst, and you hate casters with a fiery passion, or if you already have your raid gear and just really hate mages of all kinds, then this is the Paladin spec for you. Despite these weaknesses, however, it should also be noted that if this spec is catching any amount of heals, it becomes easily one of the best PvP specs by far, as often no one dares touch the thing lest they give it wreck charges and people start disappearing out of existence in battlegrounds or in open world PvP. For overall scores, I would give Ret Reckoning a 2 out of 5 for sustain, a 5 out of 5 for burst, 6 out of 5 if the target is a clothy or spellcaster, 4 out of 5 for time on target, mostly due to the massive initial burst damage potential, 2 out of 5 for jousting, and 2 out of 5 for raid viability. Difficulty level: easy to learn, hard to master, very unforgiving, very fun to play. Lastly, we have the meme spec that is only a meme to you until it does this and that and this other thing, and then Swifty one-shots you out of existence, such as stun, hit, judge, hit, seal, nade, repent, death ray, hit, all of which can be done before the opposing player can even act. To give you an idea of the RNG nature of the damage output of a Retribution Paladin, just about any single melee attack that they can make can hit for between 500 to 2500 damage for an average damage output per hit of 800, in a world where 500 hit points is 10% or more of your life total. The point here being that the odds of any single class surviving a full burst combo from a deep Retribution Paladin is ultimately shockingly low, as they quite regularly easily reach well over 5k HP damage output. The other often employed combat style for deep Retribution Paladins is jousting, as they can easily use stun and repent, which are both on a 1 minute long cooldown timer, to CC their opponent and heal back up to full health, all the while doing damage to their opponent and slowly wearing them down over time. It should also be stated that deep Retribution Paladins also gain a massive DPS bonus from taking so long between their melee attacks due to the nature, i.e. the internal mechanics, of Seal of Command, putting their average damage output per swing under jousting conditions to be about 1100 damage or more, RNG willing. Often more experienced deep Retribution Paladins will observe how the first hit goes RNG-wise, before deciding whether or not to commit to the kill or to play it more sustained with the joust, as there isn't much point stopping to heal when your first melee swing has taken out half of your target's hit points, and you can just go in for the kill. By far the biggest drawback to a Retribution Paladin, however, is not so much in getting your gear, as most Retribution Paladins complain about. It is the utter dogshit levels of your sub 3k mana bar until you get tier 2.5, which has some desperately needed intellect on it. As such, if you plan to play a deep Retribution Paladin, you must be mana conscious in the extreme, especially when falling to 30% mana or less. Never consecrate, never fail to use bandages, Never judge on cooldown without some deep internal mental thought process like, that's the last judgment I am going to do, it's rank 1 seal of command from here on out. As casting a seal just to judge it and then recasting max rank seal is 490 mana out of your barely 3k mana bar, and a full heal costs you 1100 mana or more. The point here is to just be very, very mana conscious as a Retribution Paladin early in Classic WoW's lifecycle. But this concern will ultimately fade in time with gear, in favor of maximizing damage output at a single point in time, whereupon you simply destroy your enemies. I would give the Deep Retribution Paladin a 3 out of 5 for sustain, a 4 out of 5 for burst, a 3 out of 5 for time on target, 4 out of 5 with the gear to support it, a 5 out of 5 for jousting, and a 3.5 out of 5 for raid viability. With the side note that every raid needs at least one Retribution Paladin, with that viability going up to a 5 out of 5 if said Paladin actually has Nightfall Acts. Difficulty level: easy to learn, easy to master. And so concludes the first video in this video series. Join me again in the next video when I discuss the two options of Paladin gearing, namely, Seal of Command and Spell on Hit proc Paladin.